Mark Anthony Garrett is a former Head Start student, and it's wonderful when you hear about a student that has left Head Start and done the kinds of things that he's doing. He's lecturing all over the country, but I'd like to introduce Mark Anthony Garrett to you, and I'm pretty sure you'll enjoy the presentation that he's getting ready to give you. Thank you.
Okay, to save my voice, I'm going to use this microphone. Is that okay?
Yes.
Fantastic. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Kamako for allowing me to come out this evening. I do a lot of traveling around the country, originally from Dayton, Ohio, but now reside here in Columbus. And definitely it is an honor to be here, to be in front of people who have made a decision in their life to impact children. And to be with an organization like Kamako, who is out in the community every day, making a difference in the lives of kids and making a difference in the lives of their community. So what I'm going to do is, ask my camera guy, there we go. Okay, thank you. Wanted my camera guy not to block it. But here's what I want to talk about this evening. I am not going to bore you with a bunch of statistics. I'm not going to bore you with some things that I think you don't need. I'm going to, as the kids say, keep it real. Do I have your permission to do that? And the reason that I want to do that is because when we begin to look at our children, when we begin to look at our families, we look in this country and we see that there is a decline of fathers in children's lives. We understand that there is an increase of children who are killing children. As I say, babies killing babies, babies having babies. So we are facing a major epidemic. And the epidemic is wondering to ourselves, what is the cost for us not to become involved? What is the cost for us not to build self-esteem in children? What is the cost for us not to build our families? And as we look around the country, they're building more prisons than they are educational institutions. And more kids are dying now than ever before in history. And that is a problem with me because I was one of those children who they said would never make it. Now, by looking at me and having the great accolades that Ms. Robinson has shared with you earlier, many of you may think or have the perception that I grew up on the right side of the tracks, that I grew up easy, that I grew up with a silver spoon in my mouth, but I must share with you that was not the case. I was born and raised in Dayton, Ohio, not having an opportunity to meet my real mother. I was adopted at the age of 7, and living in that environment, I wondered to myself, where's my real parents? Why didn't my real father want me? Why didn't my real mother want me? Why did life give me this negative road? But as I began to get older, and now at 36 years old, having beat every obstacle that people said I could never beat, having not done the things that people said that I would do, like dying and going to prison, ending up on drugs, I'm here today to share with you that your reality does not have to become your long-term reality. And what you currently see doesn't have to be the be-all, end-all of your life. And life starts with choice. And the choice is we have a choice to live, we have a choice to die, and that's all there is. And in this life, we're all here for a purpose and we're all here for a reason. And I think that all of us, in some capacity, have to begin to fulfill our season. So I'm going to share with you this evening some things that I think will empower you to become better people. Because we cannot give what we don't have. So if we don't have love in our heart, we can't give it away. If we're not good role models for ourselves, we cannot be good role models for our children. So I'm going to give you some things that I think will help you to become better and to become empowered so that you can make a difference in this world. As I said before, at 36 years old, I wondered why life had been so rough. But now I understand that for everything there is a season. You know, in Ecclesiastes, it talks about that for everything there is a season under heaven, a time for everything. And I know at this point in my life, the time is for me to give back. The time is for all of us to begin to look at who it is we are and look at our children, look at our families, and begin to say that it doesn't matter what the statistics say. All that matters is what we decide to do as individuals. And Ms. Robinson, I have to give her kudos and accolades because, as she said before, there was no money for this program. There was no budget. But here's something that I've learned very, very young. And that is that those people who can see the invisible can accomplish the impossible. Which means that you don't have to have the resources, you don't have to have all the money all the time, but if you can get a couple people with a vision, and those couple people can ask some other people, and those other people can ask other people, and we can have a whole lot of prayer, we can do a lot of things, we can make impossible things possible. And that's what we're here tonight to talk about, building self-esteem in children and principles of effective families. So what does that mean? When I begin to think about building self-esteem in children, as I said, I was born to a mother who had been in prison a year before my birth for prostitution and solicitation. My mother had an older son that was 1 year older than me, my brother, whom I've never met to this day. And for some reason, after my mother was released from prison, I was born. And she decided that at 24 years of age, she could not take care of me because my father was not in her life. And she felt that it would be not too good to try to raise two boys that she knew she couldn't support. So I went directly into foster care. And I stayed in foster care from an infant until about the age of 7 years of age. And at 7, my last set of foster parents ended up adopting me. And I remember at 7 years old, sitting around the kitchen table, and I was talking to my adopted mother, and I asked her, I said, Mama, I said, what was it like when I came out of your stomach? What was it like when I was born? And my adopted mother and my adopted father both looked at each other, and that's when they told me that I wasn't their biological son, that I didn't belong to them with the blood, but I belonged to them spiritually. And both of my parents had been married previously. My father had been married, and he had lost his wife, and my mother had been married, and she had been divorced. And so when they got together, my father had one child, my mother had 5. And my parents were old school parents. My adopted father was born in 1918, and my adopted mother was born in 1930. And they were old school traditional parents, which means that in those days, when you got out of line, Mama had this technique called barbecuing. And Mama said, well, if you get out of line, it's barbecue time. And you knew what that meant. Mama didn't play. Mama was just one of those mamas that she just didn't play. And you didn't mess with Mama. You get out of line with Mama was going to get you. And in those days, the respect factor was there. And we're going to talk about that a lot this evening with the young people, about respecting your mama, respecting your parents, respecting yourself. Because my mama would tell me things like, boy, I will slap you across a greasy floor and dare you to slide. I never understood how mama could do something like that, but mama was serious. I know mama was serious, man. So living in that environment, I was raised under a very strict environment. Both my parents worked very hard. My father had worked 30 years for a company. My mother worked, and both parents believed in working. My father was a very loving man, but my father was not attached to me emotionally. Though my adopted father was there physically, he was not in my life emotionally nor spiritually. My father was not the type of man that would say, son, I love you. My father was not the type of man that would come and put his arms around me and tell me that everything was going to be okay. My father was not the type of man to show any emotion. He was one of 9 children, born in 1918, coming down from Kentucky during the time of segregation, during the time of racism in the country, and he lived a very hard life, being in World War II, witnessing a lot of different things. My father just wasn't that type of man. And so there I was as a young man, wondering to myself if I could ever build this relationship with my father, and wondering to myself why my real parents at some point in their life didn't want me. So there I am at 8 years old, knowing that maybe God had made a mistake by allowing me to be born. But I remember thinking to myself at that particular time that maybe it could get better. Maybe things were going to take a turn for the better. And I remember going to one school system, and I failed the 3rd grade. I wasn't a very good student in school. And I struggled with mathematics. I couldn't do the timetables. I couldn't carry the one. I wasn't very good in the math, and so they failed me. And they also failed me because once my parents told them that I was a foster child, once they told them that I was adopted, they said, oh, but we don't expect those children to succeed. He's expected to fail. He'll never be anything. You just have to understand that those children may never make it. So there I am at 8 years old, having someone tell me that I was less than everybody else. And my mother, though she was a very loving woman, though she was a very caring woman, my mother was the type of mother who had issues of her own. And both my mother and father carried what we call a generational curse. And it was a generational curse of abuse. It was a generational curse of neglect. And though my mother, I knew she loved me, my mother had issues of her own, and my mother started telling me things like I was stupid. She would tell me that there was no reason that my real parents didn't want me because I was never going to be anything anyway. That I was an embarrassment to the family. That why was I so stupid? Why was I so dumb? Why couldn't I get along with everybody else? Why couldn't I be like my cousins and my nieces and nephews? Why was I so stupid? And at 8 years old, I wondered why my mama would say something like that to me. Why would she tell me that I would never amount to anything? And at 8 years old, they put me in a special education class for children that were slow. They called us slow learners. And they put us in this classroom and they labeled us kids who were slower than other children. And we had a classroom way down at the other end of the school, and all the other kids would make fun of us because we were those kids who would never achieve anything. We were the kids who were slow learners. And I remember going to my homeroom class, and back in those days, they would embarrass you. If you were in a slow learning class, they would embarrass you. Mark Garrett, please come down to room 312, 312, Mark Garrett to 312. And everybody knew what room 312 was. Those were for the kids who were a little bit slower than everybody else. Those were for the kids who rode the short bus, as they say. Oh, y'all ride the short bus. What about we do? You know, they would make fun of us, man. It was crazy, but it was real. So there I am going down to the room for the kids who were supposed to be slow. And the first day of school, we go into this room. And there I am sitting in the third row. And I'm looking around, kind of check everybody else in. Who could I bully? Who was going to bully me? Or who looked worse than I did? Who had a worse situation than me? And it was like 16 of us in this class. And everybody had their own problems. Everybody had their own nightmare they were dealing with. And I remember sitting in the third row with my head down, and in walks this teacher who stood about this tall. She had jet black hair, and she was full-blooded Italian. Her name was Betty Jean Ritchie. And when she came into the classroom, she changed my whole perception of what I could be, where I could go, what I could become. Because she came to the classroom and she looked at all of us and she says, I want you to know one thing, that outside that door in room 312, it says that you are slow learners. But in this class, we have no labels. This is a brand new day. This is a day where you're going to have a brand new start. And here's what I know. If you are a male, you are a king. And if you are a female, you are a queen. And royalty always walks with their head up. And she made all of us sit up in our chairs, and she made us put our head up. And for the first time in my young life, I saw a glimpse of hope. And I wondered, it wasn't possible that I could be more than my mama told me I could be. Could I be more than what society said I could be? It wasn't possible. And she worked with me for a whole year. And I would go back home, and at home I was a kid who was stupid. I was a kid who would never amount to anything. I was a kid who would just be nothing.